Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of T minus 10. It's a show with 10-minute takes on the future of education and healthcare. I'm Tim Fitzpatrick, your host, and today I am joined by Henry Peck. Henry, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Tim.
I can't tell you how excited I am to have you on because obviously you and I have known each other all the way back to the MIT hacking COVID days. Your background is fascinating, your story is fascinating. I want to give people an idea of kind of your path to where you are now, but certainly your patient story is what resonated with me most when we first started chatting. So please, if you would, give folks an idea who you are and how you got here.
Absolutely, yeah. I can't believe how long it's been since those MIT hacking medicine events too. But yeah, my name is Henry. Thanks so much for having me on, Tim. As you said, we've known each other for a while and really bonded over the patient journeys that got us interested and excited about healthcare and healthcare technology startups more broadly. But I was born with a unique neuromuscular condition under my eyes, and kind of my eyelids. When you go to the eye doctor, they kind of wave the finger this way, that way, and then they have you raise it. And you're supposed to be able to raise your eyelids. I didn't have the muscles and nerves that allowed me to do that. And unfortunately, it was a degenerative condition. So if I didn't get it addressed, it would have continued to worsen until I was functionally blind as an adult. So I'm extremely grateful for the multiple eye surgeries that I had between the ages of 1 and 17. And through that journey, I got to see the healthcare system from a variety of different lenses. As a patient going under, as a young child in surgery, rehabilitation, meeting with people to prove that the procedures were medically necessary and not cosmetic, and then all the way over to to the eye doctor and specialists and all these different things that really just got me interested in the system. But what really resonated with me, what I fell in love with the most, were the actual implants they were using to correct the procedure or to correct the issue. So that was what really sparked my interest in the intersection of healthcare and technology. So I went to Carnegie Mellon University. I studied mechanical engineering and very quickly realized there are some super smart people who do mechanical engineering at schools like that. And so I loved it. I loved the background, but the work life was not for me. It wasn't really activating the skill sets that were exciting me to do work like that every day. So I kind of pivoted across the gamut from engineering to user experience to product and marketing, where I find myself now after some time in the medical robotics, prosthesis and exoskeleton space with a company called Altoida, which is building an augmented reality and artificial intelligence driven platform to diagnose and monitor neurological diseases and brain health.
I love it. So, first of all, thank you for walking us through that. I'm really excited because I see the parallels because you and I have chatted so many times over the last 2 years between Altoida and probably what many people who have listened to other guests on this show or who I've talked to in the past are used to. But there is just so much overlap in the education lens. So, if you would, I know you kind of just gave a really high level on Altoida, but I want you to kind of frame what Altoida is doing because it's super important in terms of creating that new category in an area that people will relate to. And then your role, you mentioned product marketing and kind of transitioning out of the engineering mindset. So kind of connect the two for us.
Absolutely. So, the learning aspect of healthcare, I think, is often underappreciated. And when people think about a lot of the emerging technologies that are exciting now, virtual and augmented reality, things like that, they often, I think, misattribute the innovation of the technology to being innovation in tech alone, not just, but the innovation is really in the learning science behind it. And so at Altoida, part of what we do is we use immersive technology as a way to assess the brain. So we get you to fully express the way that your brain thinks and remembers and functions in our 10-minute activity battery that's deployed on a mobile device, an iOS or Android smartphone or tablet. So rather than have you draw a clock on a piece of paper or answer some silly memory questions that aren't fully immersing and activating your brain, we have you fully perform in augmented reality. And it's the right level of immersion for the right activity. And I think that's like when you draw that back to learning, those parallels are there. When I think about what you do at Icona and when I think about some of the others in the space using these technologies to educate people and train, it's activating the right parts of the brain. It's activating the brain in its totality at the times you want to. And so that's how we collect our data to train machine learning models to make diagnoses of diseases like Alzheimer's, for which we received FDA breakthrough device designation, and other disease states that we're working towards like Parkinson's, schizophrenia, et cetera. And my role at the company, I'm the director of global marketing. I joined the company a year ago right after the new chief executive officer and the founding team brought him in. And I've been kind of the sole commercial employee. As we now grow the company, a lot of really exciting, awesome things happening, people joining, some really cool partnerships that we're doing now, namely with Click Therapeutics and GN Hearing, makers of Jabra and Resound, if you're familiar with their consumer and medical audio solutions. So we've really expanded that. And, the education aspect for me is not just in the technology itself, but educating pharmaceutical partners on how this new paradigm shift in measuring the brain can be useful in their clinical trials. It's educating providers on how these technologies that maybe they didn't have when they were training in neurology, but how these can be useful to them as part of the diagnostic workup. And for patients, it's helping them understand how these technologies work and why they want access to health insights like this early, the things they can do, the risk factors they can control to manage and improve their brain health.
I love this. First of all, congratulations. I saw the partnership announcements, and that's such a huge win. And I know that's a huge part of your day to day and what you've been trying to grow at the company. So, congrats. Um, I do think if we could talk a bit more about, I know biomarkers are a piece of what you do. Uh, Within the pharma industry, I know that there are quite a few people that I've spoken to, kind of along the same lines of what we've talked about on this show, who are involved in that space and access to clinical trials and how we think about, especially in the kidney disease population, which many people I talk to care about. How can they be thinking about what something novel like an immersive technology is doing that addresses the challenges they're seeing in either access to trials or how they think about virtual clinical remote trials? Um, how is that going to change the way that they see things over the next few years in a way that is something for them to kind of hang on to?
Absolutely. Well, when you think about it from the pharmaceutical company perspective, you know, it's extremely challenging for them, especially in the neurological disease space, to find the right patients for these trials. It's not easy to get patients that are consistent with the pathology you're looking for, to pull them out of clinical practice and recruit them into these trials. And oftentimes that leads to cumbersome, long, and expensive screening processes with high failure rates. And sometimes, if the wrong patients sneak in the trial, now the therapy's probability of success may go down in that trial. So, we are really convinced that pharma has been hampered in the neurological disease space and kneecapped by a lack of sensitive screening tools and biomarkers to help them figure out who's a good fit for that trial. Conversely, when you administer a therapy, the way that you measure the response of that therapy in the neurological disease space is, call it analog at best, right? It's these old school paper and pencil tests that they're looking at as endpoints, and some of these more cumbersome imaging and cerebrospinal fluid based biological biomarkers. So what we're providing is a monitoring solution to see granular changes longitudinally in how someone is responding to a therapy. So you monitor somebody, consistently in high frequency, and now you build a robust profile of how this therapy is working for this individual. And how they can be thinking about it is the enormous amount of data that you can collect with a digital platform like ours and the digital biomarkers that we generate. We have 800 individual features that are being looked at every time you take this test, and that number continues to expand as we grow our IP. But you compare that with an analog paper and pencil test or any other digital company that has just put those analog tests on an iPad. Our novel augmented reality solution elicits and extracts so much data that we can now look at patient populations and better segment them into who's going to respond to a therapy based on demographics, genomics, other aspects of precision medicine. So that's what we really think of when we say we're bringing precision neurology into this, into the pharmaceutical world. And for the patients, when you talk about kind of the clinical trials, again, it is, if you're a patient going through a clinical trial, decentralized trials are obviously a huge wave right now. The way that everyone's going to run a trial in the future. Digital technologies enable you to collect these measures from the comfort of your own home as a patient on your personal device or on a company provided device. And conversely, if you're a patient, historically in these clinical trials, you kind of have limited access to know what you're doing. You're just taking tests, giving data right, left, and right. But what we provide is a full consumer journey such that even during a clinical trial like that, you can be educated on what what your scoring means, why you're taking these tests, what that data represents about your brain, and how that plays out in the real world. So we're providing that consumer journey as well, even within the context of a B2B company.
There's so much that, like, when we think about the conversations that we have with people who think about shifting, you mentioned the pen and paper and just digitizing that as one step that everyone kind of assumes is the purpose, the end all be all of digitizing anything. And we hear it a lot in VR. Of course, people say, well, we have a YouTube video, so we don't really see a need, or what is the need is the side by side. And I totally understand where they're coming from. But what is so cool about what you're describing is it's fundamentally changing just the way we consider distributing the value of something that has been already studied robustly, and plenty of patients and educators and physicians have had access to it. But now it's just so much better and enabled and empowered because of the way it's being delivered. And I think another piece of this that I maybe you could just spend 30 seconds or a minute on here is the barriers to educating for physicians. Because this is where, if you look at kidney care, a lot of people talk about the shift upstream and the ability to work with primary care to make it easier to diagnose and manage kidney disease earlier, more effectively, for example. And the one of the greatest challenges is that education piece. So as we're introducing new tools that might make it easier to uh, deliver value to the patients, but also knowing that we have to figure out the right way to educate those stakeholders and to make their lives easier. What are some of the ways or things that you've had to learn in having to overcome the barriers to educating physicians?
Yeah, it's an ongoing journey for us because there are so many physician stakeholders in this space. When it comes to memory care and cognitive care in general, most people just aren't receiving it who should be receiving it. So you talk about, the first instinct may be neurologists, and they are a huge part of what we do, and they really are the leading light in how we think about this space. But you know, all too often individuals aren't making it to that layer of care. They're not getting to the specialist when they should be receiving general cognitive assessment in their GP's office. So, there is kind of a multi-pronged approach to physician education, and we need to kind of make sure that we're providing the right level of fidelity for management and care planning depending on where you are in that journey. And the other thing is about kind of the longer arc here, and what we hope to be, where we intend to power the future of this space is also in kind of companion diagnostics in the field as more neurological disease therapies come to market with efficacious disease modifying effects across the spectrum, not just in Alzheimer's, but in so many other neurological diseases and neurodegenerative disorders. Having a companion diagnostic that can help physicians better understand who should be on that therapy is critical. So we are providing and building that solution for pharma to have kind of um, an end to end management from the kind of cradle to, not grave per se, but cradle to, I don't know, you could say generic maybe, but
Sure.
cradle to end of life of a therapy as it goes, from its clinical trials to market, needing kind of that screening, monitoring, companion diagnostic in the field solution.
Mhm. Yeah, I appreciate it. You kind of take me in there because there's definitely quite a bit for people to appreciate, and I'm sure I'll be talking to people about that exact topic. That's quite a bit in the next few months. Last question here. I just want to give you a chance to talk about what you're most excited, optimistic about. You've already mentioned quite a few technologies that you're working with, and kind of the long arc of where you hope to be. When you think about healthcare as a whole, right? So it can be within your space or more generally speaking, especially given that you've kind of been in some interesting seats, very different types and sizes of companies over the years. What are you excited about on kind of the short term horizon? So let's say in the next 12 to 24 months, and then more on that 5 to 10 year horizon for technologies, care delivery. I'm just curious what's going on in your mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I think kind of making that nice transition, still leaning in on VR and AR, thinking about that. I come from, as I mentioned, surgical robotics, and I see a really rising tide for a lot of these kind of surgical training and education companies doing what, analogous things to what you're doing in kidney care, using similar technologies, but targeting providers and, really surgeons in a different space. Education in orthopedics, when you look at companies like also VR, Precision OS, a lot of these really, really well-founded and scientifically built companies. And then you see it really now coming into some of the other surgical specialties as well. And then you see the efficacy of that moving into rehabilitation, past just training somebody to perform higher. It's also now, can I get you back to where you need to be? Can I prove that, that and a new level of efficacy with these kind of immersive technologies? So I think the right level of immersion for the right application unlocks a tremendous amount of value. And then on the longer arc, following that VR AR thread into the metaverse a bit, I am very interested and involved in decentralized science. And so I think maybe, while in the next 2 years, I think there's going to be a lot of the foundation laid, and a lot of movement happening. I think within that next kind of 5 year onward time horizon, you are going to see, industries like biotech really leverage decentralized science. It's going to become important for those later innings of biotech to be able to, access talent outside of key areas, raise funding in different ways. And I would put an ending bet here. I look at some of these other, some of these decentralized companies. I got to give a shout out to like Molecule, Genomes DAO, and all these kind of guys, and folks. I would bet that in the next, like, call it 5 years, you see a DAO sell an asset to a major pharmaceutical company. So somebody at the ground level, kind of, rather than go through traditional tech transfer and take your small molecule and you go through a DAO and a decentralized investment vehicle, and that makes its way to a commercial therapy that is owned by a major pharma company.
I would love to take that bet, and I hope we see it. And I will mark those words and come back to you when we're celebrating that happening short of 5 years from now. We'll see. Henry, thank you. This has been incredible. Last thing before we leave, where can people connect with you and see your meme Fridays and just see what you're working on day to day?
Yeah, definitely LinkedIn for sure. LinkedIn and Twitter are the best ways. So yeah, all in the put them all in the comments.
Perfect. We'll put them in the comments. In the show notes, I'll also be including some of the DAOs you mentioned. There's a few great threads that I think people will enjoy.
Oh yeah.
But Henry,
I'll have to throw it back to links for data ownership too. They would be mad if I didn't say anything.
I was expecting it, and it'll be in there. So we'll make sure we have it. Henry, thank you for coming on T-10. Always a pleasure chatting with you, and I know we'll talk soon.
Thanks so much, Tim.